That's
Welcome.
great. Thank you. So first of all, I'm very sorry that I can't be there in person. Unfortunately, I was supposed to be in Chile at this time, and then to fly to Cartagena from Chile. But I'm sure you know that there are quite some issues currently in Chile. Therefore, I had to cancel my flight to Chile, and as a consequence, also my flights to Colombia. But in any case, I hope that nevertheless we can manage my presentation this way, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak in such an important event. I will now try to share my screen and so that you can see my presentation. So what I want to do today is this idea of the modeling studies that we've done for different countries in terms of integrating electricity and gas systems, as well as modeling analysis of development of future fuels. Now, the main ideas I would like to cover is a little bit of background and context, of course, how the gas system, the gas generation system, the gas network interact with more and more renewable energy sources. The fact that it's not only about electricity, we should also be worrying about other energy sectors. Some ideas about using the gas network as a storage means for renewable electricity. And then looking a little bit to the future, what role we see for future fuels for gas power plants. The general context of this work is related to so-called energy trilemma. So the requirements to deliver energy that is sustainable, so low carbon, in other words, is secure, and of course it's affordable, inexpensive. Of course, it's not easy to meet these three aspects of the trilemma altogether. That's why it's called a trilemma. Now, what are the approaches to do this? Of course, we look more and more at renewable generation, particularly wind and solar, to try to decarbonize the electricity system. However, of course, wind and solar got an impact on the rest of the electricity system. For example, in the slide that you now see, you can see, particularly if you look at the slide in the bottom, how there is a very clear anti-correlation between wind production and gas production. As you can see, in the green line represents wind, and very clearly, when wind is, this is a UK system model, by the way. So when you see that there is very little wind, then there is lots of gas generation. And on the contrary, when there is more wind blowing in the system, the gas generation goes down. Now, this is a situation that is common in many countries, where in practice, gas generation, particularly combined cycle gas turbines, and in some cases also open cycle gas turbines, are used to balance the variability and the uncertainty of wind and where it's the case also solar energy. What are the challenges when we talk about that? Well, there are some challenges related to the technical aspects and the economic aspects of operating such an integrated system with renewables and conventional gas generators. If you look at the slide they show here, what I plotted here is for different penetration level of wind capacity in the United Kingdom system, again, the level of displacement that wind brings onto gas conventional generators in terms of both capacity and energy. To be more specific, if you look at the level where it says 30,000 megawatts wind, you can see the orange column indicating 23%. That means that 30 gigawatts of wind effectively displacing 23% of energy produced by gas generators. You also see a smaller column, sort of reddish brown color, again for 30,000 megawatt of wind, indicating 6.4%. That refers to capacity displacement. That is what is considered the secure capacity of conventional generators, gas generators, that can be displaced by wind by maintaining the same reliability level. This is the so-called capacity credit of wind. As you can see, the capacity that can be displaced is much less than the energy. And this effectively means that if wind is not there to cover the peak demand, because there may be not wind blowing at some point when it's needed, of course you still need conventional generators, gas generators, to supply the peak demand. Therefore, the relatively small amount of capacity that is displaced. However, any time that wind or solar energy is producing, is available, because the marginal generation cost of renewable energy is close to zero, obviously that would displace energy that otherwise would be produced by conventional generators, gas generators. If you look at this more specifically in terms of utilization level of these generators, what I plot here is the utilization level for the entire generation fleet in the UK. It was not, it is not a real number, but it's realistic numbers. It's based on a model that is basically reflecting the real UK system. And you can appreciate the utilization level for different generation units that are constituting the UK generation fleet. As you can see, in brown, you can we indicate the utilization level of conventional power plant when there is no wind and no renewable in the system. Whereas in orange, again, we see the utilization level in the presence of 30 gigawatts of wind, which is almost the current amount that we have in the system. Clearly, the utilization level of the generators goes down substantially. And on average, it goes down from about 50% to less than 40%. This is particularly severe for the so-called peakers. So these are basically the last 50 generators in the UK fleet. That are also the smaller generators and also the more flexible generators that are used to cover the peaks and to balance the system. As you can see, their utilization level actually goes down dramatically, and for many of them moves from 30-20% to less than 10%. There are quite a number of generators that are affected, and these are primarily gas generators. Why is this important? If you plot the cost of production from a conventional generator, for example, a gas generator, against the average utilization level of this generator, you see some form of hyperbolic function there. And of course, you would like to have a very high capacity factor utilization level so that the average cost of production will go down, because this average cost of production would also incorporate investment cost. Therefore, the more energy you can produce, so the higher the capacity factor, the lower will be your average cost, because you will be able to recover your investment cost over a large amount of energy that you would produce. And I'm sure many in the audience will be very familiar with these concepts. So if you take, for example, the current average today, you will see that to about 50% corresponds to a certain level of average cost of production, again, for thermal generation plants. Imagine that this is primarily gas because coal is not really part of the system now. Then if you introduce more and more renewables in the system, because the utilization level goes down, as I mentioned earlier, on average, therefore the cost will go up a little bit. Now, what happens if I look at the peakers? These are those last 50 generators that I was showing in the last slide. Well, the peakers utilization is lower, is much lower on average than the average utilization factor of the whole fleet. Therefore, the cost of production of the peakers is actually much higher, simply because, well, on one hand, they cost more in terms of investment, but also because primarily they produce much less. Now, what happens if I introduce renewables in the system, wind? As we saw, the utilization of the peakers, utilization level of the peakers goes down even more and substantially. And by going down in terms of utilization level, the cost of production increases significantly. And because of the non-linear nature of the region that we are investigating, actually they become really, really expensive to the point that may get out of business. This is primarily due to the fact that renewables basically are pushing out of the market conventional generators, and particularly flexible generators that are no longer able to recover the investment. This should also be considered within a context where, on the other hand, the marginal cost of production of electricity is going down because, of course, in the market you have more and more wind and solar, and therefore sort of market clearing prices are lower. Therefore, also the opportunity to recover the cost of production by playing in the market are much less. Why is this troublesome for the system? Of course, this is troublesome for conventional generators and gas generators in particular, because they may just go bankrupt. But what does this mean for the system? Well, if you look at the role of gas power plants today, effectively, they are the flexible generation units that are providing flexibility as well as security and reliability. But what happens if these conventional generation units go bankrupt, get out of the system because pushed out by renewables? And in many cases, these renewables are actually there because supported by energy policy schemes rather than because fully competitive in the market. Well, what happens is very intuitive, and unfortunately, it's already happened. So what I'm showing here is obviously a blackout and the consequences of a blackout. And I'm showing this because effectively this that I presented now is what happened in Australia 3 years ago. There was the famous South Australia blackout, which was exactly due to the fact that renewables were pushed out of the market. Conventional generators, gas generators were pushed out of the market by renewables. Therefore, the moment that there was an event, a problematic event, and you needed security support from conventional generators, it was not possible. And there was a system-wide blackout in South Australia. On the other hand, I also wanted to say that I'm not prepared I did not prepare the slides after the blackout. Actually, some of these slides are 10 years old. They are coming from my lectures at the University of Manchester, my lectures on power system economics and grid integration of renewables at the University of Manchester, which I used to teach several years ago. So exactly the same slides I used to teach many years ago could explain very clearly what happened in the Australian system. of course, the slides were relevant to the UK scenario, and this tells lots of stories. First of all, that the issues that we are facing are actually common around the world. And second, that actually we are able to somehow interpret and predict the consequences of some events sometime, and maybe we do not realize it. Now, said that, what are the flexibility challenges are we seeing with integration of renewables? I'm sure that you are very familiar with the famous duck curve that was produced by the California ISO a few years ago, showing how the net load of the electricity system, which is the load minus the solar generation, would go down substantially in central hours of day over the next few years. Of course, this is now like a few years old, and the prediction referred to 2020, which is tomorrow. And in a way, again, what was predicted is already happening. As you can see, all the central part of energy is now being eaten up by renewable energy, by solar energy, effectively. But still, the net load at the peak time, so the peak net load still happens at 8 p.m. So what happens is that you have a net load that is relatively low during the day, with a minimum around 2 or 3 p.m. And then a very high peak that basically is not affected at all by solar generation, because it happens during the evening when there is no solar energy. Of course, the ramp now is very, very substantial to cover the difference between central hours of the day and peak demand. And this ramp needs to be undertaken by conventional generators, again, gas turbines, to provide this flexibility. And one of the questions is, are the gas turbines able to do that? What is the cost of wear and tear, and what is the impact of this ramping on the economics of gas generators, also given the fact that in any case they are producing much less energy, and therefore they might again risk to go bankrupt, like I was presenting in the previous slides. Very similar issues, you would say, in UK models for the future, where effectively with more and more solar here in the UK, which is not a very sunny country, as you would know, there may be substantial ramping issues, and the behavior of the combined cycle gas turbines in future scenarios changes significantly, and also in a very non-linear ways. For example, the utilization level first goes down and then goes up because of the requirements for reserves. If you use conventional generators, gas generators, to provide the reserve services. And these reserve services will be more and more needed in larger quantities in the future to deal with variability and uncertainty in wind and solar. And to address this a little bit better, actually, we started developing more consistently integrated system models for the UK national grid that will look at integrated analysis of the electricity and gas transmission networks. So these are the real networks, and this is the model that we developed some time ago for the UK national grid. That was particularly worried about a number of issues that might come with flexibility. As many of you would know, when you operate the gas system during the day, you would do this by using the line pack flexibility that is available in the gas pipelines, especially the amount of storage that is available in the gas pipelines that serves as a buffer for energy that is needed to be pushed into into gas generators, for example, or to supply the heat demand, like in the case of the UK, where the heat demand is very substantial. In this picture, in blue, you see the power station demand of gas for electricity. In red, you see the gas demand for heat. And then the yellow-green line there is a typical um, behavior of the line pack, which effectively is some form of storage or buffer, as I said, that we have to manage the gas network during the day. And normally you would refill the line pack during the night, and then you would use this line pack. So you would use the storage available in the gas network during the day until reaching a minimum immediately after the peak, and then again you would start replenishing again, filling up again this storage that you have available in the gas network. And this is a real picture of the UK gas system, where you can clearly see the so-called line pack swing that has got a daily behavior and a daily cycles, going up during the night, then down during the day, and then again while gas is being used, and then again being filled up again during the night, ready to provide flexibility for the next day. Now, if I imagine this kind of situation in the future when there is lots of renewables, as I said, there would be lots of variability brought by these renewables. And again, we put ourselves in a future scenario with, in the UK system, lots of wind and lots of solar. As you can appreciate, you may have some days where over 1 or 2 days, wind can change from about 25 gigawatts to about 5 gigawatts. So we have a huge variation in wind output across 1 day or 2 days. The problem is not only the fact that you have this huge variability, as you can better appreciate here. The problem is also your ability to predict this variability of wind, so the uncertainty of forecast in wind and similarly in solar, and therefore the ability of procuring resources that can balance the system. And again, of course, I'm talking primarily about gas power plants, because effectively, when you manage the gas system, as again many of you would know much better than me, you would schedule your electricity system, of course, but also your gas system the day before. And then within the day, what you would do is you would try to manage the unscheduled requirements for providing gas to the system by managing, of course, the line pack flexibility, first of all, but also in case using storage terminals, LNG terminals, and all that. But primarily, you would like to use the flexibility available in the gas network line pack. When you have situations very extreme, lots of wind out, I said it's not just about the variability; it's also about the complexity in managing this variability, given the potential uncertainty of that. This picture, I show what the predicted generation was for combined cycles under similar conditions I was showing earlier, and what in blue, and what the actual generation was in green. Obviously, the blue is coming from some form of generation schedule, day ahead generation schedule, whereas the green is coming from some form of real-time dispatch to balance the actual wind that was available at the time. If I look at the impact of this variability in gas production onto the line pack, as you can see, the forecast line pack that the system operator would somehow have available, again in blue, can be quite different from the actual line pack that we would see in green. And in particular, as you can see, there may be some levels where the line pack can become dramatically low to the point they can touch minimum line pack levels that the UK National Grid indicates as thresholds that should not be touched, because effectively under those conditions the gas network starts having pressure that is too low with a complete risk of shutdown. So the problem is, because I have all these renewable energy sources that are highly variable but also partly unpredictable, if I rely more and more on gas power plants to balance that massive amount of variability, I may actually have trouble with the physical management of the gas network and particularly of the line pack. Now, when we started looking into this, of course, we focus primarily on electricity gas systems with requirements for power plants. But then, if you look at the bigger picture, and here you see the Sankey diagram of the UK energy system a few years ago, but things have not changed much, you will see that when you have all the different energy sources and inputs, and then you try to deliver different energy outputs to different sectors, it's not really only about electricity, and perhaps it's not about electricity at all. In this picture, you see, in terms of energy outputs, three colors. You see the sort of pinkish color. I always have difficulties actually in describing these colors. They're just very strange colors. So let's say the pinkish colors, and I'm sure that you would understand the one that I mean. So the pinkish color actually is the amount of electricity that is going into the system for different sectors. Then you have the purple color, which is the amount of heat that is being produced. And then you have that kind of green color, that is the amount of energy for transport. Now, all of this energy is primarily coming from fossil fuels. So when we talk about decarbonization and decreasing emissions from energy production, and we focus so much on electricity, actually electricity in terms of energy output is only a tiny bit. And in the UK in particular is around 20-25% of the total energy output. And in Europe is very similar. About 40% actually comes for heating. And this is all coming again from gas primarily. Other 40% comes from transport, various types of oil products that generate fuels for transport. Therefore, the big question is not only how you decarbonize electricity, but also how you decarbonize heat and how you decarbonize transport, given that all of these are coming from fossil fuels that are actually much more polluting than electricity. This is a big research question, and it's a big practical question, not only in the UK, but also in Europe, Australia, around the world. Particularly heating and transport are the big challenges. And the idea of electrifying heating and transport more and more through heat pumps, electric vehicles, and all that actually comes from the fact that we understand somehow how to decarbonize electricity. Therefore, by electrifying the transport sector and the heating sector, and by having clean electricity for those, we also have hopes to decarbonize the overall energy sector. However, unfortunately, it's much more complicated than that, because pure electrification would require massive investment into infrastructure, and it's not really clear if this can be done at all. However, this in our studies that we were carrying out for National Grid brought into the picture a further assessment primarily the need for understanding how heat was interacting with the electricity, of course, gas, under future scenarios of electrifications or use of other technologies. And this really goes into the question, how do we optimally integrate all energy sectors, and we try to make use of renewables that in many cases could actually have to be curtailed. Now, as an output of our studies, what we developed for National Grid was an assessment of how, under future heating scenarios, when you integrate the electricity and the gas systems to deal with balancing the electricity system that is now dominated by renewables, but also providing heating demand in different ways. For example, by gas boilers, electric heat pumps, combined heater power plants, and so on. The challenges for the gas network to deliver this actually were even higher than for just renewables. And in fact, what we found for the UK system is that at times we needed to limit the output of the gas power plants that were supposed to provide renewables flexibility, because otherwise we would not have sufficient flexibility in the gas network to provide sufficient gas to the power plants. In other words, while what we found out is that if you only consider the electricity system without coupling electricity system and gas system, and of course the two markets, you would think that you are okay in terms of balancing the electricity system by gas power plants. However, when you also included gas system operation, the gas system basically could not make it. So by having the two systems decoupled, you would not realize that there would be not only inefficiencies like commercial inefficiencies, but potentially there could also be physical constraints that eventually might not deliver what one would expect. And this, of course, is particularly serious if you're using your gas power plants to provide balancing and reserves, and then suddenly your gas network is not capable to actually pump sufficient gas into gas turbines because the pressure will go down too substantially in the gas network. So what we did for National Grid was actually to develop a tool that would integrate the gas network flexibility constraints into the ramp constraints and reserve constraints of the electricity system, so that somehow, from a technical perspective, the two systems could become more integrated. Of course, we're still looking at future scenarios, but these are not very far. And in order to deliver on this technical system in its full capacity, of course, it would also require market changes and integration of electricity and gas markets. I will skip this slide, which basically says the same thing as I said in terms of extreme ramps that you have on the gas system. Now, what other options do we have actually to add this system between, again, renewables, the electricity system, the gas system, and so on? Can we use the gas network as a storage means for electricity renewables? This is because, of course, we talk a lot about electricity storage, but batteries are relatively expensive, and batteries are good to store small amount of energy, not large amount of energy. Pumped hydro systems are not always available for also geographical reasons in many countries. Therefore, there is a need to look for other forms of storage. Could we use electricity from renewables to produce gas, basically hydrogen, and then inject this hydrogen into the gas network and use the gas network as a form of storage. And in this table here, you can see the calculation that we did some time ago for National Grid to try to estimate how much hydrogen you could actually inject and store into the gas network, given physical limitations in terms of blending hydrogen with gas that is coming because of a number of limitations that are either related to the fact that transmission pipes are in steel, and steel is not very good to keep hydrogen inside the pipe. Or there may be other issues such as the fact that current appliances at homes are not really able to burn large amount of hydrogen in the natural gas. However, of course, in the future these things could be changed. So what we did was to add hydrogen into the picture and develop a full integrated model of electricity, heat, gas, and hydrogen system for the whole UK that could provide some ideas about future scenarios to the UK National Grid. And it is in this context that we developed the first models about power to gas. So this idea of taking renewable electricity that is cheap, or that in case would even have to be curtailed because there's too much electricity with respect to demand, turn it into hydrogen via electrolysis, in case produce methane by putting together hydrogen and CO2 in the so-called Sabatier reaction, and then inject into the gas network either hydrogen in certain volumes according to the limitation that will have to be established, or directly methane after having methanized hydrogen and CO2. Now, when you do that, what will happen is that all the curtailed wind generation, in case solar generation that you will have in future scenarios with lots of renewables in the system, now could be used actually to decarbonize the gas sector, because this is effectively what we are discussing. It's like taking now clean electricity coming from solar and wind and producing hydrogen that can be injected into the gas network so as to decarbonize the gas network. There are a number of use cases you can do with this kind of scope. For example, you can use this tool to bypass electricity constraints. So, for example, if you take the north of Scotland, you see the red interconnector there on the electricity system between Scotland and England. That interconnector is congested, but there is, of course, lots of wind available in Scotland. But this wind cannot be transferred to England because of transmission constraints. Therefore, can you actually use that wind that otherwise would be curtailed, and in the nearby gas terminal produce hydrogen and inject hydrogen into the gas network? And a few years ago, we performed this analysis by indicating how much hydrogen, or in case synthetic natural gas, you could inject into the gas network, and the cost benefits and emission benefits that you could have in doing this kind of analysis. So on the one hand, you bypass electricity constraints, and on the other hand, actually you bring economic benefits and environmental benefits, because you basically use otherwise curtailed wind to decarbonize the gas sector. Similar use cases can be done to increase the pressure in areas where pressure levels can be particularly low. So you would inject hydrogen or synthetic natural gas to raise local pressure in some areas of the system. Or, of course, you could use this power to gas for seasonal storage. So particularly by storing by storing low carbon electricity during summer when there's not much, when there's lots of wind and solar and not as much demand, including for heating, then put into the gas network, store into the gas network, and then use this clean gas during winter when there is a higher heating demand and also requirements for electricity in general. Of course, I'm not forgetting transport. Transport is still there, and in fact, you can talk about hydrogen vehicles too that are particularly suitable for long distances and very heavy transport, like trucks and trains, and to some extent also ships. And again, this is so-called power to hydrogen to X, where now power to gas is actually used to supply hydrogen vehicles, and buses and trucks and all that are ideal cases, because in those cases batteries are too big, too heavy, too expensive. Therefore, hydrogen can be actually a very suitable energy vector. But you would say, okay, but how about Australia? Or this is primarily coming from my past work at the University of Manchester. How about Australia? Where actually we are carrying out a number of exciting experiments, I would say, in Australia. For example, looking at integration of electricity and hydrogen into virtual power plants. For example, in an area called Port Lincoln in South Australia, where you have a number of wind farms that produce lots of wind, but unfortunately, they cannot export to the rest of the system because, again, of heavy congestions. And at the same time, there are more and more requirements for connections for solar wind farms. And again, for the same reason, they cannot export solar energy to the rest of the system because of transmission congestions. So one idea was, why don't we take all these available wind and solar that otherwise would have to be curtailed, and we produce hydrogen, and we use this hydrogen for a number of through electrolysis, and we use this hydrogen to, for example, power local hydrogen vehicles, to power local gas turbines that can operate with a mix of gas and hydrogen, and in case to export hydrogen to other areas where there is a requirement for hydrogen. This so-called is there any problem? Sorry, just okay. Keep going. So there is a so-called multi-commodity hub, where if effectively you have a mix of electricity and fuel imports, and then you generate a number of energy outputs that are renewable electricity, hydrogen. You supply hydrogen vehicles. You provide a number of operational services to the system that I can't detail now because of lack of time. And in case you can also export hydrogen. And in fact, in the picture, is to more renewable energy sources they have, and producing hydrogen that could be exported to other countries. For example, could be exported to Korea, in Japan, that does cars and renewables, by maintaining the same business case that they have now. I mean, what I show here is the Sankey diagram of Australia, where again there is lots of available fuel sources, particularly coal and gas, and even uranium. And much of these resources are actually exported. They're not used locally, they are exported. So Australia would like to do something like, instead of keeping exporting fossil fuels, can we now start exporting clean fuels, basically hydrogen, or in case ammonia, that is a little bit easier to transport than hydrogen. so to become a sort of superpower as it is now, but of clean energy, not of fossil fuels. And these are some of the scenarios that have been at a massive penetration level of renewables and huge amounts of electrolyzers in the order of 100 gigawatt, 150 gigawatt of electrolyzer to produce hydrogen, to be able to export at scale huge amounts of solar energy and wind energy. We are now analyzing the technical feasibility and the cost feasibility of all these scenarios. Eventually, we see everything coming together. And for example, in some sort of futuristic ideas, what we would do is we will have combined cycle gas turbines that are equipped with carbon capture and storage to capture, of course, CO2. And then some of this CO2 or all CO2 would actually be captured and used with the clean hydrogen coming from power to gas to create methane in the Sabatier reaction again. And then this methane will be recircled into the system. And then again, it would be used for balancing purposes. So with this kind of mechanism, you would basically optimize the use of both electrolyzers and renewable energy sources, as well as the current the current or future gas system and gas power plant that will be used for balancing. So we're really looking to sort of understand the feasibility of these future scenarios, and in particular, we have one important project. It's called Future Fuels CRC. We are analyzing all these options at scale, combination of electricity, gas, and hydrogen systems, and assess various technical and economic scenarios. This is a very large project. The whole Australian gas industry is basically involved. It's about 100 million project, just to give you an idea of the order of magnitude. It's basically a research project of 100 million. Very relevant is also the project we have with UK National Grid, where we are currently reviewing their planning methodology, particularly to deal with large-scale uncertainty in planning. At the moment, we're doing this for the electricity system, but then we plan to extend this also to the gas system, because of course, the big question will be, how do I plan an integrated electricity and gas system, given the huge uncertainties that I have, particularly on the gas sector and with all this new technology coming up into the systems. And of course, I will be looking forward to collaborations with everyone that would be interested in similar topics. Now, to conclude, what I wanted to show is that renewable energy are introducing substantial challenges in terms of flexibility. Gas generators and the gas sector in general will be greatly affected, both physically and commercially. There is a clear need to increase the interaction between the electricity and gas system in operation, in technical terms and in market terms. So really to coordinate more and more the operation, technical and the market operation of the two systems. And this requirement will increase even more in the future when we have more electrification of transport and gas and transport and heating sector, and new clean fuels coming up like hydrogen that could be used, for example, for transport, also for heating, for export, and all that. Finally, all of this needs to be planned, and in order to do proper planning, we will need a tool that is currently not available, because it would also need to basically keep into account uncertainty in a proper way, and we're looking for stochastic optimization tools, so tools that take into account these uncertainties in different ways, so that we can plan the integrated system in a robust way. And here there are some references, but I'll skip that. And this is what I wanted to show you now. I would be very pleased to receive questions, of course, to participate in the panel right after this. Thank you.